Today I'm going to talk about two areas of grief, kind of two threads on the same line. And that's going to be the aging adult who experiences grief, and then the sandwich generation, which is typically the individuals who are the adult children of the elderly parent, who are also raising children or may have adult children of their own. As we age, we do experience a number of different losses, and we may not really understand the full impact of those losses as we age. Individuals who become older, 70, 80, or 90, are going to experience more losses than a younger generation, typically. The losses that an older person may encounter are the losses of their parents, their siblings, close friends. They may lose pets, they may lose their spouse or neighbors. Another type of loss, which is called ambiguous loss, is when we lose things that are not necessarily due to death. We can lose our independence, we can lose some of our health, such as our vision or our well-being. We can also lose some of our mobility. We may have to leave a home where we've raised our children and are very comfortable, which means we also leave the neighborhood. Those can be very difficult for older adults. There are two types of losses that we can look at as we age. One are the normal on-time losses that all of us will experience. We will experience the adjustment to age. We will experience the loss of some of our mobility and our independence, and those things are expected. As we become older, perhaps in our 60s and 70s, we may expect to lose our spouse. Those are called on-time events, things that we expect. They're normal development. A second type of loss is called off-time events, and those events might be the loss of a grandchild. They might be the loss of a child. Those losses are generally very difficult. Most parents do not expect to lose their children. We all would like to perhaps outlive our children. We don't want to deal with their death. And so those can be very difficult losses. Helping our parents or an aging relative with grief is fairly simple when we have the tools. Primarily, I find many people don't want to bring up the topic of loss or grief. There's a lot of fear about making someone cry. And I usually say making someone cry, because we really can't make someone cry by bringing up something that is true, and if we do it in a kind and gentle manner. Older adults do experience grief the same way that we experience grief. When we lose a friend, or we lose a spouse, or a pet that we've had for 19 or 20 years, we are going to feel sad. That's normal. And being able to talk about that with our parents. It can be as simple as bringing it up in a conversation when you're visiting with your older adult, mentioning it must be difficult to lose your close friend. I know that you've been friends since high school. That must be hard for you. And that can start a conversation, letting your older adult loved one know that you care and know that you're comfortable talking about it, giving them an opening so that they can process and express their grief. Grief generally becomes problematic when we're not able to express it or process it. Some people call that bottling it up, that we just hold it inside and we don't have an outlet for it. Sometimes when that occurs, when we don't have an outlet or a way to express our grief or to process our grief, we can become depressed. And I do want to emphasize that becoming depressed or being depressed is not a normal part of aging. Depression is a mental illness, and a lot of times it's so common that we don't think about it as mental illness. I like to compare depression to something like diabetes so that we can look at those two organs in our body, how our brain functions compared to how our pancreas functions. Our pancreas is responsible for making insulin, which helps us process sugar in our body and make energy. Our brain is responsible for producing chemicals that regulate our mood. If our brain is not producing the correct amount of chemicals or the correct type of chemicals, it's possible then that our mood will be the symptom that demonstrates or shows that we have depression. Signs of depression can be easy to see, and then sometimes they can be a little more difficult. Sadness is not always a mental illness. Sadness is not the same as depression. Sadness can occur when we've had a loss, when something has occurred that causes the feeling of sadness. Sadness that lasts a long time or can't be related specifically to an event could possibly be depression. If we see our older adult perhaps crying or maybe isolating or not doing the things that they normally do, maybe not being as chatty as they were or inviting people over like they used to, we might get an indication that they could be struggling with grief or loss and perhaps depression. It's okay to bring that up to our parents. It's a difficult conversation, but it is okay to say to our mom or our dad or our uncle or our aunt, to say, you seem pretty sad lately. Are things going okay for you? Older adults may be afraid to admit that they're having difficulty because they don't want to lose their independence. They may think that if we believe something is wrong with them, that we'll send them to a home. Also, there is a very negative correlation with mental health care among the older population when we're looking at 70s, 80s, and 90-year-olds because of the way that we have developed our treatment of depression. Things are not the same that they were in the 30s and 40s and 50s. So sometimes some education about mental health treatment can be very appropriate. A good place to start is with our family physician. Our family doctor knows us well, knows what we're like normally, and will be able to provide a referral or possibly the first line of treatment. Try not to be afraid to bring it up to your parent. If you're educated and you know that throughout our lifetime we all experience losses and grief and on occasion depression, then we can speak honestly about it and get the treatment that we need. When we look at the sandwich generation, those adults that are 40 to 50, maybe 60 years old, and they're taking care of younger children, perhaps teens or young adults. They might have grandchildren, and they have aging parents. They may also have career responsibilities. There is grief that occurs in that regard too, because time is very stretched, and sometimes we might feel like we can't do the things that we want to do or that we desire to do. Be there for our children as much as we'd like to be, care for our parents the way that we envisioned caring for our parents. It's very important to talk to other people who are having the same experience. There are definitely some good support groups that caregivers can join to get ideas about caregiving and also to talk about the feelings that caregiving brings out in an individual. Most of us do want to see our parents age healthfully and to be there to assist them. Sometimes older adults will express, or they may keep it to themselves, that they feel like a burden. They don't want to need help. It's hard for them to need help. It's hard for them to ask for help. And when we look at ourselves and the way that we are, we can envision that when we are older, when we are 70, when we are 80 or 90, we are going to be very much the same that we are today. We'll just be older. So there isn't a huge gap between a middle-aged person and an older adult other than age. Many of our feelings are similar. Caring for an older adult, as I mentioned, can be kind of difficult. It's hard to stretch our time, but it's also important to let our parent or older adult know that we are very willing to help them, that we're available to help them. And also, a good strategy to use is our young adult children or grandchildren can be very essential providers with our elderly parents or relatives. If we enjoyed being around children as a younger person, we will probably enjoy that as an older person. And it can be very rewarding to have grandchildren or great-grandchildren come over to visit with us, take us shopping, or maybe pick up some things for us at the store. The losses in older adulthood are cumulative. So we look at a series of losses that occur over time. We might start out with the loss of a career, which might be a planned event. We may plan on retiring, but when we are retired, we may not be prepared for the idle time that we have. Or maybe some of our peers are not retired, and therefore it leaves us lonely. We are used to being with people each day and having activity generally in our careers. Another stressor with retirement can be when our spouse retires. It can be very difficult sometimes to live together in a home when our spouse is no longer working and we're not accustomed to having someone around. So those adjustments can also cause some difficulty in emotions. For those of us who are caring for older adults, perhaps our parents or an older relative, it's important to ask the older adult what type of help they would like or how we can be of assistance. Some older adults may not want to go to the store because it's difficult. It may be hard to bring their walker or their wheelchair or cane if they're using one. They may prefer to make a list and have you shop for them. Sitting down and talking with your aging parent or loved one can be very beneficial. Talk to them like you would a friend. Mention that you notice that things are starting to get a little difficult for them, and ask how you can be of service. Let them know some of the things that you're willing to do. Sometimes I put this in a social exchange theory perspective, and how I look at that is that when we were young and children, our parents cared for us. They made sure we had things to eat, that we got ready for school, and that we were well cared for. Our responsibility as adult children, therefore, revolves to help our aging parent with some of the things that they need help with. So they may need some help carrying in their groceries. They may need some help with shoveling or lawn care. We shouldn't make assumptions because sometimes older people, our elderly loved ones, are very capable of doing the things that they've done for years. And so we shouldn't come in and try to do everything for them, but to be compassionate and to respect boundaries and to ask, how can I help? I have some extra time and I really appreciate all the things that you've done for me as I was growing up, and I'd like to give some of that back. Perhaps I could help you with laundry or maybe with the garden. Having that open, honest conversation at first might feel awkward. Many adult children think they can't talk to their parents. And that might be true for some families, but in my work with aging adults, I have found that older adults are very open to talking about grief and loss, and talking about the things that they need and the way that they feel. A common experience is feeling like a burden and not wanting to burden their children or their younger relatives. And so keeping that in mind is very important to offer the types of help you can give, and maybe even collaborate with your older loved one about what services you might purchase and what services you'll do yourself. Caring for an older relative from a distance can create some challenges to overcome. If we don't live in the same community or the same state as our aging relative, it takes some creativity to know how to help our aging relative. We can enlist the aid of perhaps a neighbor or a pastor or somebody that we know works with our parents to find out what our loved ones need. I had an experience myself in which my mother was aging and she wasn't taking care of some things at home. But because I lived 90 miles away, I wasn't aware of those things. My uncle brought it to our attention. And that's when our family came together and we made a plan of how to help my mom with her snow removal and her lawn care. So being creative, talking it over, and finding out who can help you care for your aging parents with love and compassion. And that's the most important part. Older adults are not a burden. They enrich our life. They have beautiful stories and history to share with us. Taking the time to sit down and listen can be so rewarding and can also help them navigate through the changes that occur throughout the lifespan. Aging can be a wonderful experience. It can be very enriching. We gain confidence and we gain wisdom as we age. And we'd like to share that with younger people. So younger people, take the time to sit down, talk with the people that are older in your life, talk with the older relatives, listen to their stories. They have a lot to share. And if you are concerned about your loved one, about grief or loss or how they're handling it, do reach out to one of our community agencies. Hospice is a very good agency to reach out to for grief and loss. There are support groups in our communities. We may ask our pastor. We may ask another friend, how did you cope with it when your mom was depressed or your dad was depressed? How did you bring it up? We have to remember to use our resources so that we can do the best job that we're capable of in caring for ourselves and our families and the older adults in our life.